Hi there, it's Leo from Firecrawl, and in this video, we'll be taking a different approach. Instead of building with Firecrawl, let's actually ship with Firecrawl. Now, while taking the approach of actually building with Firecrawl, you're essentially using it inside of your workflow loop to build any app you need. And it will basically act as the tool for your agent to fetch for furthermore context. And to do that, we have all sorts of tools. We have the CLI, we have skills for all of the different agents out there. We have MCPs, and these are all tools that your agent, again, can just use to fetch for context. In this video, let's actually understand how you can ship with Firecrawl. And the way to do that will be to basically make good use of Firecrawl's APIs. But still, just to make this clear, skills, CLI, MCPs, these can all be used to ship with Firecrawl as well, especially if what you're shipping is an AI agent. If you empower it with all this, then you're essentially empowering it with web data so that your users can do a whole lot more. Now, honestly, some apps or some features inside of an app is pretty simple, and you just need to fetch for one specific API. It can be either scrape, either search, either mixing them around using the response from one to execute another one. So for example, you can use search and then get the results from those URLs of the search and scrape them. Or you can just add the parameter to scrape from within your search. There's a whole lot of things that you can do. And that's actually an interesting problem we were discussing earlier today, which is that most people might not have a technical background. And because of that, they won't understand going inside of a documentation, which endpoints they should be using, what parameters are available, and all that. And that's where AI can really help. So if we were able to instruct AI about all of our documentation, sell it, we have scrape, search, you can use this parameter inside of search to then scrape. You can use the agent to do this or that. It would probably guide users to ship with Firecrawl much better. And an example of an app that we could build shipping with Firecrawl is this one that was actually built inside of Lovable. You can type in any URL. As soon as I hit analyze, it should now use Firecrawl's endpoint to go and search for the entire brand analysis of the website that I type in. Okay? Analysis complete, and this is it. So this really isn't about hooking up tools inside of an agent and all that. It's actually just taking advantage of our endpoints and having the app created based on that. Okay, so at this point, I hope you understood what I'm aiming for, which is instructing the LLM to build using all the tools that we provide and actually having those tools as a part of the applications, not just using Firecrawl to fetch for web data for the agent to build with that context, but actually using Firecrawl inside of the app. Now, since everything surrounding LLMs involves context, let's suppose we need to do this in the most manual way possible. I would pretty much tell it, create a NextJS app that blah, 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 and it should use Firecrawl to do so. This is the documentation from Firecrawl that you should follow to use their API. And then what I would do is probably go over to the API reference from Firecrawl, grab scrape. So let's copy this page, go back here, paste absolutely everything in here, and then maybe just having this part of the endpoint is enough. But what if the best approach is using batch scrape? So I would feed it context on that too. And because I added batch scrape, I need to get back the ID for that batch scrape. And what if I also wanted to just cancel the batch scrape? And by the way, is the best approach even using scrape? What if I need to search? What if inside of the search, I could just use the scrape parameter? Maybe inside of the search, I could just use the scrape parameter and have everything retrieved. What is the best approach given everything that Firecrawl provides us? The point being is that this would probably need to be a conversation inside of Claude Code where you'd send off everything that Firecrawl has, and this would require a lot of manual work, or you could just get this URL and tell it to every time use Firecrawl to go inside of the documentation, fetch everything, retrieve it. But what if we had something better? What if we had something like a skill that instructs everything around Firecrawl, not to use Firecrawl during the building process, but again, to ship with Firecrawl. So it would probably go through some use cases and understand that what the user wants to build maybe is better off using map, or it's just an agent task that needs to be ran. All right, so at this point, the idea has evolved to, instead of sending the entire context manually, we have a set of skills, which, by the way, if you still do not know what a skill is, it's basically a markdown file that instructs everything the AI needs to know. That's a summary of it, but the way that it is efficiently handled by agents like Claude Code is the magic of it. And now the problem is, how would I build this skill? An idea is just to provide the full context over to an LLM, tell it to create a skill that covers all of the use cases for that given documentation. Basically, this would be a conversation with Claude where I tell it, here is my scrape feature, here is my search feature, here is how I map things, and these are all of the APIs that I have access to. Please build me a skill that tells me which is the best I should use for each specific case. So let's actually do that right now. My prompt is create a Claude Code skill for me that contains instructions on how a user should build using Firecrawl. It should include use case examples and provide guidance on which Firecrawl endpoints to use for a given task. This should be a skill that serves as an overall guide for the user. I have toggled on my connector and added Firecrawl as the connector that's going to do this web fetching. Additionally, I want everything to be based off of the API reference. So let me add fetch context only from Firecrawl's API reference. Let me send off that link and let's wait for it to build it for us. During the task, you can see that it first went inside of the documentation, understood all of the different endpoints. So scrape, search, crawl, map, batch scrape. It should eventually identify more. Yeah, extract, agent, browser, and basically fetch for all of the context necessary to build this entire skill. All right, it's done. This is the skill that I can place inside of Claude Code. And whenever I'm building something that is related to web data, I can have it understand which is the best endpoint from Firecrawl that it should use to build that feature. And we'll actually use it right now to build something even further. This right here is the prompt that I just used inside of Claude to build that skill. If you notice, I only mentioned Firecrawl here. I also mentioned Firecrawl down here, and I've added the specific API reference URL down here. What if I wanted to dynamically create a same set of skills for any API reference in the internet? Because, for example, if you wanted to use recent, I figured they already have a set of skills, but if they didn't, something like this could work as a starter kit for you to start building with recent and understand all of their available APIs without having to do a web search for every single page they have every time you build with recent. So this is exactly what we're going to build. Basically, there should be an input where the user adds a URL for an API reference. Firecrawl should then be able to go inside of that URL. So for example, if it's the LangChain API reference, it goes inside of LangChain's API reference URL, figures out everything that they have, and creates a final skill. So the end result is something like this. We'll actually try to use progressive disclosure so that the entire context isn't like this. It ideally should have a different file for each endpoint. And to build this app, let's use the skill that we just generated that should help us by instructing which features from Firecrawl is best for an app like this. I just created an API reference skill generator folder. Inside of it, I ran npx skills add firecrawl/CLI. Here I'll select the main skill, hit enter, and yes, I want to use Claude Code, install this inside of the project, use symlink, yes, and we're all set. Now, before I run Claude, let's copy this skill, go inside of our set of skills, create a folder for this skill, which will be called shipping with Firecrawl. In there, let me add a file. Inside of it, let's create the skill.md. And inside of the skill.md, let's paste over everything that was just generated here. Now, if I run Claude, the skill should be identified. So let's see the set of skills. It shows up Firecrawl and the Firecrawl guide. I named it wrong, so let's rename this to guide. I hope it doesn't interfere with the usage of this skill. Okay, so now let me get this entire prompt. And in here, my prompt will be basically, I need to create a simple NextJS app that executes an LLM. By the way, I'm going for OpenRouter since you can test out many different LLMs in there. So OpenRouter as the provider to help a user create a Claude Code skill based on a URL API reference given. First, help me understand which are the best tools/endpoints I can use from Firecrawl to do so. The main prompt executed from the agent is basically this one. All right, I just pasted that in and let's add use. Actually, it's not shipping guide, it's Firecrawl guide. So use the Firecrawl guide skill to understand how we should build this. Don't code yet, just explain. All right, it loaded the skill, should have all the context, and there it is. We didn't have to use any tools, it just used that specific skill, so that's awesome. Now the recommendation is to use crawl, which is fantastic. This is actually what we need to do. Since we already have a URL that was provided from the user, we could, from that API, just crawl through all of the different sections and retrieve everything that we need as the context for the LLM to build the skill. So yes, crawl is actually one of the best options for this. Aside from that, an alternative would be to do a map plus batch scrape, which is actually what crawl already does. Crawl is, and I said this, I think in the previous video, is a combination that relieves you from having to handle the mapping and the scraping. Hopefully now my final prompt is, okay, go on and build this in the most effective way. Ensure that the skills generated uses progressive disclosure. Present the skills each in a nice way with a nice interface and allow the user to download it as a .zip. Honestly, you'd probably not need this first sentence, but a nice tip that I can mention here is test whatever fetch you are doing to ensure we're getting the correct schema structure. And additionally, since we're using OpenRouter, let's use structured outputs, since this is a way that the LLM will always respond in that specific structure, allowing us to use each parameter for the front end, as well as building the .zip file. It just makes it much more easy. So let me view this as Markdown, copy everything here, and add to also output structured data. Here's the doc for that. Let me hit enter and let's see what it builds for us. All right, the first thing Claude did is plan out everything. You could either decide to clear the context window because 24% of it is already used, or I could just bypass permissions, keep that context window and have it build whatever it needs to. So the advice would be to read through what was planned, understand, so for example, crawl strategy, this is noted here, structured output, and then it adds a snippet of how to implement it. So better than sending off the entire documentation, it already has all the context in this planning. That said, I can now clear the context and it should reduce the potential of hallucination as well as be more cost efficient and maybe even faster. It's been 5 minutes and now it's attempting to build the app, so should be done in a few seconds. All right, it's done. Took 5 minutes and 43 seconds. Let's execute this app. Since it built using npm, let's run npm run dev and go over to localhost 3000. All right, not the best interface, but we didn't even specify anything around design. Let's add firecrawl.dev and see if it requires HTTPS. Yes, it does. Let me HTTPS and hit generate skill again. Something went wrong. We didn't add the Firecrawl API key. To do so, let's go back to the Firecrawl dashboard, click on API keys, create Firecrawl Skill Builder, hit create key, copy that key, go back, replace it here, and now we also need the OpenRouter API key. That should be found right here. Let me hit create, Firecrawl Skill Generator, create, grab that key, replace it here, and restart our app. Now if I click generate skill, it should use the Firecrawl crawler. Okay, nice. It placed a loader, and apparently it already went through 50 pages, and we got an error from the OpenRouter response. So one thing we didn't decide here is which model is being used from OpenRouter, but that was actually defined right here. Let's just replace that string with the Haiku 4.5 model that has a better tool usage and isn't so expensive. And by the way, this error might not be related to the LLM specifically, but we can verify if that's the case right now. Okay, so this is a much better log. It's telling us that the context fetch from Firecrawl is too big for the LLM to read. So let me copy this response, go back to our Claude Code session. I'll send that over as context and tell it to find a better strategy, either chunking or using Firecrawl's feature to retrieve less context. All right, it provided a bunch of different solutions, but one solution it didn't think of, and that's probably because we need to refine this skill even better, maybe providing different use cases so that it understands this. But crawl actually has a prompt. I could add to this prompt exactly what I need retrieved. It shouldn't blindly just fetch for all of the first 50 pages. It should rationalize on what it needs to fetch and only fetch for that. So my prompt inside of Claude Code is the crawl endpoint from Firecrawl has a way to add a prompt. So please do so. This way it will only crawl for the pages we need it to. All right, that was pretty quick. It just added the prompt parameter, only crawl pages that contain API reference, documentation, endpoints, descriptions, and yada, yada, yada. Let's go back to our app and try to generate the skill once more. Oh, this is interesting. Analyzing crawled pages and structuring into a Claude Code skill with progressive disclosure. And by the way, you might already know this, but even if you type the same exact prompt, the results might be different. So it's a matter of understanding how you can get that error, send it back to Claude Code, and have it iterate on that to fix or add the feature that you're looking for. Okay, it's done. And this is the entire design. I'm not sure if this is skill specific, so I just downloaded the zip that it generated, and let's take a look at the files. Yeah, apparently it ignored completely the progressive disclosure, but the Firecrawl API skill is here. And like I said, the idea here for building anything is just iterate, and eventually you'll get to the expected result. But I hope this video helps you understand how you can fetch for Firecrawl endpoints context, feed it over to Claude Code to ship an app that uses Firecrawl under the hood. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments section, and we'll see you in the next video. Till then.